The woman's toddler also inside but not harmed.
Heather Mack, the Oak Park woman convicted of murder in Bali, will be in Chicago courtroom today. What she intends to ask the judge.
And hospitals across America are being stretched thin with cases of RSV, COVID, and the flu. A closer look at the triple-demic as we welcome you on this Thursday morning.
Live from Chicago's #1 news, ABC7 Eyewitness News at 7 starts streaming now.
And good morning. Thanks so much for joining us as we get you started streaming. We're doing, look at this. This is a quick change right here. I like that.
It's real TV.
Absolutely.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Mark Rivera in for Terrell.
All right, and I'm Val Warner in for me.
In for you.
And Tracy is...
For you.
Tracy or Trixie?
Oh, good question. Let's head over to Tracy Butler for a look at the forecast. Hey, Tracy.
Well, what kind of weather do you want?
Oh,
okay.
I don't want to talk about the snow that's coming maybe tomorrow. So
Yeah.
let's just stick with today.
Okay,
Rain.
Tracy is today, Trixie is tomorrow.
Oh, I love it because tomorrow's Friday. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Trixie should come out on Fridays.
All right, well, this morning, yes, no matter who I am today, we do have a fair amount of cloud cover overhead. Things are pretty quiet right now around Chicago as we look at the temperatures for you. Out the door, 36 in Waukegan, 34 degrees in Valparaiso, 35 degrees right now in Peatone, and 34 currently in LaSalle. We're going to keep it dry today, just a fair amount of cloud cover. Tomorrow, things do change, and we will talk about a sloppy start that we may have on our Friday. That's coming up in my next report. Roz?
We've got a lot of suburban problems, so that's where I want to start right now. We're hearing about a possible fire at a house in Bellwood at Boland and St. Charles Place. Now, this is just going to be a little bit east of Manheim, so we've got emergency crews responding to that location. Crashes. Updating this situation in Elgin, Randall and Big Timber, bad injury crash there. They still have southbound Randall closed. It is causing delays from I-90 all the way down to the scene of the situation. Now, we also have word of a semi on fire in Oak Lawn at 95th and Cicero. So big delays on both of those streets. Expressways, we don't have any new crashes out there, but we've got travel times ranging between 35 and 45 minutes heading inbound between the tri-state and the downtown area. Val and Mark.
Okay, Roz, thank you. New this morning, police say a woman shot and killed a man during an argument at a gas station on Chicago's South Side. This happened last night at 82nd and Kedzie in the Ashburn neighborhood. Police say the woman pulled a weapon during the dispute and the two began to struggle over it. The gun discharged. He was killed and she suffered a wound to her hand. Police say she has a concealed carry license and charges are pending.
Right now, Chicago police are looking for the person who shot a woman and man inside an apartment on the South Side.
Officers found a 2-year-old boy inside. He thankfully was unharmed. But Jessica D'Onofrio is live at CPD headquarters with more on just such a disturbing story, Jess.
Val and Mark, Chicago police say they believe this was an isolated incident and that there's no threat to the public. Now detectives are interviewing potential witnesses. Yesterday, 27-year-old Giovanni Jenkins and her 79-year-old father, Curtis Hardman, were found shot to death inside an apartment at 81st and Drexel in the East Chatham neighborhood. When police arrived for a well-being check, they found the bodies and Jenkins' 2-year-old son, CJ, who police say was unharmed. We've blurred his face to protect his identity. Jenkins was a medical assistant at Holy Cross Hospital. Her coworkers say when she didn't show up for work yesterday, they knew something was wrong. So they called the police and they called her, saying the baby picked up the FaceTime call. Some of her coworkers were too upset to show their face.
He was kind of just walking around and they didn't hear any adult in the background.
He would only repeat everything to you. So if I asked him, CJ, where's mommy? Well, where's mommy?
So we still had the baby on the phone too. One of the other coworkers was asking the baby to like, oh, come to the door, come to the door. And that's how we got him out.
The child was taken to Comer Children's Hospital for observation. This as police continue to search for who committed this terrible crime. Meanwhile, family members tell us that they are heartbroken and trying to hold it together, saying that Jenkins just didn't deserve this. Val and Mark, back to you.
Okay, Jess, thank you. And new this morning, a woman is dead after being shot in the city's Inglewood neighborhood. That happened just before 6:30 last night near 72nd and Green. Chicago police say that woman in her 30s was found on a porch with a gunshot wound to the chest. No arrests have been made.
Happening today, the Oak Park woman found guilty of playing a role in her mother's murder in Bali. She is expected to be in court today for a bond hearing.
Diane Matthews live outside the Dirksen Federal Courthouse, right in the loop. Diane.
Mark and Val, Heather Mack's attorneys will ask the judge to release her from custody until her trial next year. Mack spent years in prison in Indonesia after authorities say she helped kill her mother and has been indicted on conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice here in Chicago for helping her ex-boyfriend stuff the body of her mother, Sheila Von Wiesmack, into a suitcase while they were on vacation in Bali back in 2014. Mack is asking to be released until her trial. Her attorneys claim she poses no danger to the community and is not a flight risk. Prosecutors say they plan to fight that request. Mack is being held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center downtown. Her request to be released came just days after a judge ordered Mack's 7-year-old daughter into the temporary care of a cousin. Mack is set to go on trial on July 31st. Today's hearing begins at 10:30 this morning. Val and Mark, back to you.
Okay, Diane, thank you. And now to an Eyewitness News exclusive this morning. Our cameras were rolling as an 11-month-old boy was reunited with his mother yesterday. That reunion happening after the woman's SUV was stolen with that child inside. Nikki Sukatis says everything collapsed around her when she realized her son was gone. She locked the car, had gone to pay the parking meter near 19th in Michigan when the SUV was stolen. A man who lives nearby says he's talked to the city about solutions to this carjacking trend.
It's been going on since the summertime, so it would be nice to see a little bit more of a police presence to make the residents and the business owners in this area feel a little bit more comfortable, but it's sad overall.
Police found that car a block away with the child inside and unharmed. They say they don't have a good description of the suspect, and they have not made any arrests.
Chicago just hosted the largest naturalization ceremony ever in the Northern District of Illinois. Roughly 2,000 people, all born in other parts of the world, crowded into Wintrust Arena in the South Loop last night. For many, it's a culmination of years-long process to become an American. The group of newly sworn-in U.S. citizens included people born in 130 different countries. Now at 7, a warning from health officials this morning. Doctors are calling this a triple-demic. That's the spread of the flu, RSV, and COVID, and we are talking all at the same time. The climbing cases are straining hospital resources, and there are now new reports the nation's pharmacies and drugstores are seeing and seeing spikes in demand for cold and flu medications. Justin Finch is covering the story for us live from Washington. Good morning to you, Justin.
Val, good morning, and really all just beginning here. Many Americans right now looking for those over-the-counter cold and flu medicines are instead finding empty shelves. That's largely because this wave of respiratory illnesses we are now seeing is coming earlier than usual, and stores are racing now to keep up. Hospitals nationwide are stretched to their limits amid surging cases of the flu, RSV, and COVID. From New York State,
these 3 viruses are all making it very difficult for us to practice routine medicine.
To Texas.
Our hospital is full, our ICU is full.
80% of adult hospital beds are full, the highest peak since the Omicron surge. And now hospitals are seeing COVID cases rise again. The CDC director urging Americans to consider masking and get their flu and COVID vaccines.
We are seeing high rates of flu, higher than we've seen this time of year in over a decade.
With an earlier than expected spike, some local pharmacies don't have enough supplies of over-the-counter cold and flu medication on hand. The White House saying the supply chain for those medicines is strong.
My grandson, who's in 2nd grade, still wears a mask.
In Maine, respiratory illnesses are forcing some schools to close. Nevada now fast-tracking nursing licenses to handle a flood of pediatric patients.
It's unusually high so early in the year. We worry about what's going to happen later on this month after the holidays.
She had low oxygen, which they call hypoxia, and a fever, and they said that they needed to admit her right away.
This family says their toddler had to wait almost a full day in the ER before a hospital bed opened up. After 4 days of treatment, she's now recovering from RSV, the flu, and a collapsed lung. And for those who are still looking for those over-the-counter treatments, you want to try perhaps several stores or even shopping online. Doctors say those generic versions of your go-to medications are also an option. Val, back to you.
All right, Justin, thank you. Indiana's Attorney General has filed 2 lawsuits against TikTok. The first accuses the Chinese-owned social media company of luring children onto the platform by misleading them about the level of inappropriate content on the app. The second lawsuit accuses TikTok of holding onto highly sensitive user data and allowing that personal information to perhaps be accessed by the Chinese government.
The deadline to submit your holiday lights display videos for the Great Chicago Light Fight is fast approaching.
Submit a video of your home at ABC7Chicago.com or tomorrow at noon.
Yeah, viewers will be able to vote for their favorite. The winner will be announced live on our 6 a.m. news Friday, December 16th. We've seen so many every year. I'm like blown away by this, so I'm so glad. I cannot wait to see what y'all come up with this time.
We're going to take a moment to pause and touch to a special report out of ABC News where we were hearing word that Brittany Griner has been freed from Russian prison. Take a listen into this.
To 9 years in prison. She was recently moved to one of those penal colonies. And again, this has been negotiations that have been going at the highest levels, but have been happening behind closed doors. It is unclear at this point, I believe, what who the White House is going to swap for. We actually just have that in. This is Victor Bout, the Russian, if I remember correctly, the convicted Russian arms dealer. Moscow had wanted to potentially have in exchange for Vadim Krasikov, the assassin who shot the former Chechen rebel. That did not happen. But, George, this is a huge deal. It is breaking right now, and we expect to hear more from President Biden. Later this morning, around 8:30, he'll be speaking here at the White House. A big scramble to get everyone here this morning. This was not on the agenda. It happened very early. And again, we expect to hear from him shortly.
Okay, Cecilia, thanks very much. Pierre Thomas, let me bring you in. What more can you tell us about Victor Bout?
Well, Victor Bout is a convicted arms smuggler of the highest order that the United States government had convicted. He was serving a 25-year sentence. I spoke with a source just a few moments ago who said the swap had in fact taken place. Brittany Griner for Victor Bout. Obviously, law enforcement, not the lead on this particular case. This was dealt with at the highest diplomatic levels. As Cecilia just said, the president himself signing off on the swap. The White House was under enormous pressure to get this done. The likes of LeBron James, the Stephen Curry, major stars in the NBA telling the White House over and over, get this done. This woman does not need to be in custody. So, therefore, the United States government reacting to this have been working behind the scenes. My source saying the swap has taken place. Law enforcement was involved in transporting Victor Bout to the location. Swap has taken place, George.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring you Martha Raddatz, our Chief Global Affairs anchor. And Martha, we know there are other Americans in custody in Russia, including Paul Whelan.
Paul Whelan, and this is going to be a huge issue. The Whelan family, of course, has put pressure on the administration as well. He was arrested in 2018. He has been held there ever since. He was accused of spying. The Russians claim they found a USB drive on his person that included the names of intelligence officers. He has really been in the news with Brittany Griner. She, of course, has the celebrity. There are so many people who came forward and pleaded for her release. She had the unfortunate timing. She was arrested about a week before the Russians invaded Ukraine and has been held ever since. She, of course, in June said, I did have hashish oil with me, thinking she'd get a lesser sentence. That did not happen. This is, of course, great news, but the Whelan family is going to be hugely disappointed, George.
Thank you, Martha. I want to bring in our military analyst, Steve Gaynor. Steve, we know this is a straight-up swap so far. This is the details we have for Victor Bout, the arms dealer. I guess one of the big questions will be is, does this have any connection to the war in Ukraine?
George, it has every connection. I think there's another question here, and that is why now? Brittany Griner's been in jail for a while now. Her public star is declining just a bit, and that means she's less utility as a negotiating pawn to Putin. So he saw his opportunity here. Remember, it all comes back to the relationship between Russia and the U.S. and what's going on in Ukraine. And so Putin probably said, now's the time to do it. This is our maximum negotiating leverage, and this will get us the best PR and hopefully improve the relationship with the U.S. So now is the time. And you notice that Victor Bout is in there. His heyday was in the 90s, and he's really not that big a player here. So they had to do a 1-for-1. I'm not surprised that Whalen wasn't included. They weren't going to give us a 2-for-1 deal.
Thank you, Steve. Cecilia, you said this is a big deal for the Griner family. We're also learning that the White House and both she and the president have spoken with Brittany.
Yes, exactly. And I'm thinking back to this summer. We have heard, frankly, very little publicly from Brittany Griner as she has been in captivity. Of course, we all have seen those horrifically sad images of her during those trials held behind glass, or basically held in captivity there, and just heartbreaking images. But back in July, the president did receive a letter from Griner on the 4th of July in which she said that she was terrified that she could end up there in Moscow forever. There has been a lot of communication between President Biden and Griner's wife, Sherelle, as you just said. She was here at the White House late in the summer. But, George, it was just not too long ago after the midterms that President Biden signaled that now that the midterms had ended, that perhaps Vladimir Putin would be willing to talk more seriously about a prisoner exchange. The president knew that Vladimir Putin was very closely watching the political situation here in our own country, and was hoping that, in fact, now that the politics of those midterms were over, that would signal some kind of sit-down. Usually the U.S. negotiates behind closed doors on these high-level talks like this. And in this case, there was an unusual move over the summer where the administration came out publicly to say that they had put this very substantial offer for this exchange on the table, hoping to secure Griner's release and, of course, Whelan's release back in July. But the U.S. offered this proposed exchange. Again, as I was saying, for Bout, Moscow did not really take that seriously. The U.S. implied that they didn't feel like they were getting very far in those negotiations. But even the fact that they publicly had talked about that detail of the negotiation was pretty unusual, and just shows, again, we can't emphasize enough what high stakes, the high levels that these talks have been happening at. Thank you, Cecilia.
I want to go back to Martha Raddatz. Martha, let's pick up on what I was talking about with Steve Gaynor. Interesting time now in the war in Ukraine. It's been grinding on now for months and months. We had President Macron of France here last week meeting with President Biden. Of course, Macron has been pushing for negotiations. You wonder what else is going on behind the scenes.
Well, I was thinking today about what Vladimir Putin said yesterday about nuclear war, that nuclear war is more likely, and yet he tried very hard to downplay that the Russians would ever use a nuclear weapon. He basically talked about his own mental stability as well, saying, we are not mad. We know what nuclear weapons do, and we use them only as a deterrent. Vladimir Putin wants this war to end. He wants to get out of this war. He has talked about negotiations. The Ukrainians will have none of that. They think they have made progress. So Vladimir Putin, this seems like the exact right thing to do, as Steve said, right now, to release Brittany Griner, to try to get some better relationship with not only the U.S. but the world. But I don't think that's really going to work, George.
Probably not. Let me bring Steve Gaynor back. Steve, we saw the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, yesterday also say that basically the end game would have to include Vladimir Putin pulling back all the way, maybe getting Crimea, nothing else, nothing that he's gained since the war. Possible that Vladimir Putin, given the situation he's in now, could ever accept that?
I don't think so, George. It would be political suicide. The Crimea holds a special place in the hearts of Russians and in Putin's heart as well. So I don't think he could give that up and politically survive. I think if they go back to the pre-February 15th line before the Russian invasion, that's probably going to be the negotiating benchmark. But at this point, I think that there's a lot of long winter grinding and negotiation that's going to have to go on before we can begin to think about peace talks.
Okay, Steve. Pierre, what more are we learning about Victor Bout?
Arms dealer of the highest order, someone who had a fleet of aircraft, a merchant of death, as he's been described in the past. And it's clear that the U.S. government felt enormous pressure to use that chip, because this is not the kind of person that the United States government would want to free from a lengthy prison term. But the fact that Brittany Griner was seen as an important figure, had become a symbol of unfair treatment in Russia, that the administration felt the need to make this singularly important move at this particular point, George. Again, just to emphasize, this man was a person who was one of the bigger arms dealers in the world. He had been convicted, was serving his term, and now the United States government said, okay, we'll release him in order to get Brittany Griner back.
And so, John, Carl, let me bring you in as well. Pull back a little bit. We know there was quite a pressure campaign to get Brittany Griner out of Russian prison, all through Washington, all across the country.
This was a top priority for President Biden in particular. Made a major effort. For months, it was a private effort through channels to try to pressure the Russians to release her, offering up, of course, Victor Bout. What was extraordinary about that campaign is that at one point, Biden went, and the Biden administration went public with it, George, publicly making it clear they were willing to trade Victor Bout to get Griner freed, something that was an indication that the negotiations really weren't going anywhere. But this has been something that Biden has personally been involved, the personal involvement of the president, and of course against the backdrop of the Russian invasion of Ukraine at a time when Russian-U.S. relations were at a low, really a low since any time since the Cold War.
Okay, John, Carl, thanks very much. Again, Brittany Griner has been released from a Russian prison in custody with U.S. officials right now. We're expecting to hear from President Biden shortly, and we'll be back with that in just a few moments.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Okay, obviously that was just a special report where we are just learning that Brittany Griner has been freed. It has been a prisoner exchange for Victor Bout, who was considered at one point a merchant of death. He was convicted and serving his sentence. The president is set to speak in about 9 minutes or so. We're going to take a quick break.
Yes, we are.
And then we'll come back with more. But they're still on it.
Now, an update from ABC7 Eyewitness News.
Good morning. It's 7:23. I'm Tanya Babich. Right now, a death investigation is underway in Chicago's East Chatham neighborhood. Yesterday, 27-year-old Giovanni Jenkins and her 79-year-old father, Curtis Hardman, were found shot to death in an apartment at 81st and Drexel. Jenkins' 2-year-old son, who was also in the apartment, was not harmed. Police say they believe this was an isolated incident and there's no threat to the public. We'll check on our ABC7 Aggie weather forecast now with meteorologist Tracy Butler.
Hi there, Tanya. Good morning. Well, right now, as we do take a look at our temperatures, 34 degrees, that number right now at O'Hare, 39 degrees currently at Midway. We have 32 in Aurora and 34 degrees now in Valparaiso. Today, a lot of clouds with us, highs in the low 40s. Tomorrow morning is going to be very soggy. And for some of you, the farther north you go, mainly from O'Hare on north, is where we have the best chance of getting some snow mixing in with some of that rain. 1 to 2 inches of snow going to be a possible accumulation expected along the Wisconsin line. We'll take a break, Roz, after this.
Now's the time for a healthy start. So let's move. Let's rest and recharge. And put our health first. Let's be well. To do that, let's eat well. Breathe deep. Find joy in the little moments. and do what we love with who we love. Together, let's live well. Advocate Aurora Health.
Welcome back, everybody. The expressway's not so bad. We're averaging 30, 40 minutes on most of them. Heading in, no new crashes there, but we've been busy in the suburbs. We've got a new crash in Elmhurst on York Road near Butterfield. We've got one in Hanover Park causing delays on Lake Street, big ones for Lake Street at Greenbrook Boulevard. And Chopper 7 is over Oak Lawn, where we had a semi with a brake fire on Cicero Avenue at 95th. They have just reopened the road, so traffic is now getting through, but the semi's still there. They're going to need to get a heavy wrecker to get it out of there, and traffic is a little bit slow. Again, this is on Cicero, just south of 95th Street.
Welcome back. Cloudy start to your Thursday morning. Taking a live look over the city this morning. 35 degrees too. A little warm up coming, but we'll check in with Tracy in just a few minutes. A local school is accused of calling the police on a child with autism over missing vaccination records.
The parents of the eight-year-old boy say their son has all of his shots, and this was all a mix-up over medical records. But they say the school took an extreme measure, calling the police on their son for not having his records on file. They say their son was escorted off school premises, sent home by police, and was labeled a trespasser.
You just put my son in a police car, and you didn't tell me to come get him. You didn't tell his dad to come get him. I mean, it's people on his emergency list you could have called to come get him, and you decided that it was easier for you to just call 911. I felt like you criminalized him. I felt like you gave him an experience at 8 years old that he did not have to have.
Well, tonight at 10 o'clock, our Samantha Chapman's investigating those disturbing allegations, how the school is responding, and what the police department that sent the child home is saying about the alleged incident. Again, that story airs tonight at 10 p.m. only here on ABC7.
Coming up this morning, major health news about Celine Dion, which she is revealing this morning.
Plus, Heather Mack, convicted of murder in Bali, will appear in court today in Chicago, hoping to be released on bond as she awaits trial here.
You're watching ABC7 Eyewitness News at 7, streaming live now.
Yes, you are. And let's take a quick look at some of the stories we'll be watching for you today. Heather Mack is expected to appear in Chicago courtroom this morning for a bond hearing. Earlier this week, attorneys for the Oak Park native requested she be released from jail while she awaits trial here in Chicago. Mack is facing conspiracy to commit murder charges, and a new court filing claims she was, quote, directly involved, unquote, in her mother's 2014 murder in Bali. Mack and her boyfriend both served time in an Indonesian prison for that crime.
We're expecting to learn the cause of the death of a Polish man here in Chicago. The Cook County Medical Examiner is expected to release the autopsy results for 21-year-old Krzysztof Schubert today. His body was found yesterday morning at Oak Street Beach. He was last seen over the weekend at a bar in River North. A co-worker tells us that Schubert had been in the U.S. since last month for a work project in Joliet.
Today, the second annual Juice WRLD concert is happening at the United Center. Thousands of people are expected to gather to honor Jarrett Higgins' life. The Chicago native and rapper died 3 years ago today. There'll be performances and so much more. Tickets are still available for the concert. That all starts at 8 o'clock tonight. And good morning. Welcome back. I'm Mark Rivera in for Terrell.
And I'm Val Warner. We're going to take a look outside and toss it over to Tracy. Cloudy start to the day, Trace.
Yeah, very much so. There you see the evidence right there, and confirmed by our satellite imagery too. Well, right now, as we look at the temperatures, they're not moving a whole lot, but 38 currently at O'Hare, 37 in Gary, 37 in Kankakee. We still have 32 degrees in DeKalb and 32 right now in Aurora. Today is going to be a day where, the cloud cover dominates our sky. We might get a thin spot or two, but overall, we are looking at a quiet weather day. As for tomorrow, anything but quiet. I think tomorrow morning it is going to be wet. I think there will be a rain-snow mix at times tomorrow as well. And we're going to talk more about that in my next report. Roz?
I wanted to update a situation we've been monitoring in Northwest Indiana for most of the morning. This happened earlier on northbound I-65 on that long ramp going toward 8094. There was a tar spill. It came off a construction vehicle, and as a result, part of that ramp remains blocked. Now, if you're traveling northbound on 65, if you enter it from 37th Avenue, you're not going to be able to go westbound on 8094. You'll either continue north on 65 or east on I-8094. But the backup starts at 49th Avenue. It's pretty huge, and state police say it could be several hours until they're able to get that cleaned up and reopen all of the lanes on that ramp. Expressway's not so bad, about 30 to 40-minute travel times. Val and Mark.
All right, Roz, thank you. Now to today's talkers. Singer Celine Dion is revealing she suffers from a rare muscle disorder known as stiff person syndrome.
It's described as a very painful condition marked by frequent muscle spasms.
I've been dealing with problems with my health for a long time. And it's been really difficult for me to face these challenges.
She detailed the diagnosis in an emotional social media post this morning. She's planning to reschedule her upcoming concert tour dates as she undergoes treatment. According to Johns Hopkins University, that disease affects only one person per million.
Now to the overnight release of Harry and Meghan's Netflix docuseries. The first 3 episodes are now streaming.
It's really hard to look back on it now and go, what on earth happened?
There was a war against Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
It's about hatred. It's about race. It's a dirty game.
The couple criticizes the British media. They talked about the racism Meghan experienced when their relationship became public. We also hear from Meghan's mom for the first time about Meghan's childhood and the couple's relationship. They also showed never-before-seen footage into their lives now, their engagement, their first few dates. Harry and Meghan both say while navigating their relationship was difficult, they used that experience to become closer. A statement at the beginning of the docuseries says members of the royal family declined to comment, and there is a disclaimer saying that all interviews were completed by August of 2022, letting viewers know that the series was filmed before Queen Elizabeth died in September. Harry and Meghan have been criticized for releasing their tell-all docuseries so soon after her death. Some are also saying it's not completely accurate. The next 3 episodes will be released next week.
This kind of stuff is fascinating to me. I'm not like a royal lover in general, but I think just kind of getting into the nitty gritty of this is it's a little tawdry, but it's also just totally fascinating.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm a little curious. I'm not a royal fanatic either, but however, I am curious to see, because I think their romance, their relationship, their marriage got so much attention. Obviously, they are leaving, their duties. And I just kind of want to hear from them. I think the thing that stood out to me is that her mom, and when I think about it, I don't remember hearing much from her mom. So I'm curious as to what her mom says about her upbringing. I want to watch it. What do you guys think? Are you into it or not into it? Curious? Want to watch it?
I'm very curious. I'm right in line with what you're saying, Val. And actually, I'm going to be on an airplane this weekend. So I'm going to have a lot of time.
Perfect timing.
Time to watch it. So yes, I am definitely going to watch this.
I agree, though. I think that hearing from her mom, especially with the sort of the criticism that she was facing in the UK, I mean, it just was absolutely ridiculous. And then also sort of that tabloid media stuff where, they're paying for her estranged father to, all the letters, all of that stuff. Like there's just a lot going on and a lot for a couple coming together to face.
Right. What do you think, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm very curious about it. I've always kind of been fascinated with the royals. I actually saw Prince, now King Charles, speak at the College of William and Mary. I was surprised how funny he was.
Wow.
Very, very funny. So I don't really know much about the royal family other than what we have all seen. But I am curious about some of these claims that some of the things that they are using in the documentary were things that they personally approved, but now they are suggesting that they were actually intrusions by the royal press. And I know they've been talking about that. So I'm curious about that as well. I can't help but believe so much of what happened to his mom has influenced, and understandably so.
Absolutely.
So many of his decisions, and I can't imagine what he had to go through in that grief process in front of the world as a youngster.
The grief process alone.
Yeah.
But to do it publicly like that?
That publicly.
Yep.
And you know what, Tracy? You bring it. Those are so good points. But something that you said that made me think about it, his grief process, but look how different it turned out for his brother versus him. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like they were, but all along, even when they were little, is it safe to say that they were always kind of different?
Very.
Well, I mean, one
okay, so now I'm tiptoeing around it.
I think so. One is the heir to the throne. One is the heir to the throne of England, and one is,
And that played out, you got to wonder.
His brother. And one is his brother.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, and I think that is sort of definitional when you're looking at how you define your character and your sort of life as a self. You're like, okay, I'm being defined in reference to this other person constantly, and I think that's hard. That's got to be hard.
But you know what the other thing is, and Val, we can relate to this as parents. How many times have you said, "I cannot believe how different my kids are"?
Yeah,
good point.
And I mean,
good
granted,
point.
I don't have two princesses in my house, but I don't know.
Maybe
you have two princesses.
Yes, you do, Tracy. Come on.
All the girls are princesses. They are princesses.
All of them.
You know what I mean. But yeah, I mean, how many times have you said, "How are they from the same parents? They're so different."
Yeah, and different in every way. How they grieve, how they love, how they behave. I mean, because, here he has always been kind of that oddball, that rebel. So we're going to take a pause here and go to breaking news with the president speaking on Brittany Griner.
The arms of her loved ones, and she should have been there all along. This is a day we've worked toward for a long time. We never stopped pushing for her release. It took painstaking and intense negotiations, and I want to thank all the hard-working public servants across my administration who worked tirelessly to secure her release. I also want to thank the UAE for helping us facilitate Brittany's return, because that's where she landed. These past few months have been hell for Brittany and for Charlie and her entire family and all her teammates back home. People all across the country have learned about Brittany's story, advocated for her release, stood with her throughout this terrible ordeal. And I know that support meant a lot to her family. I'm glad to be able to say that Brittany's in good spirits She's relieved to finally be heading home. And the fact remains that she's lost months of her life, experienced a needless trauma, and she deserves space, privacy, and time with her loved ones to recover and heal from her time being wrongfully detained. Brittany is an incomparable athlete, a two-time Olympic gold medalist for Team USA. She endured mistreatment and a show trial in Russia with characteristic grit and incredible dignity. She represents the best about America, just across the board, everything about her. She wrote to me back in July. She didn't ask for special treatment, even though we've been working on a release from the day one. She requested a simple quote, "Please don't forget about me and the other American detainees. Please do all you can to bring us home." We never forgot about Brittany. We've not forgotten about Paul Whelan, who's been unjustly detained in Russia for years. This was not a choice of which American to bring home. We brought home Trevor Reed when we had a chance early this year. Sadly, for totally illegitimate reasons, Russia is treating Paul's case differently than Brittany's. And while we have not yet succeeded in securing Paul's release, we are not giving up. We will never give up. We remain in close touch with Paul's family, the Whelan family, and my thoughts and prayers are with them today. They have to have such mixed emotions today. And we'll keep negotiating in good faith for Paul's release. I guarantee that. I say that to the family. I guarantee you. And I urge Russia to do the same to ensure that Paul's health and humane treatment maintained until we are able to bring him home. I don't want any American to sit wrongfully detained and one extra day if we can bring that person home. My administration has now brought home dozens of Americans who were wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad, many of whom had been held since before I took office. And today, we also remember the other Americans that are being held hostage and wrongfully detained in Russia or anywhere else in the world. Reuniting these Americans with their loved ones remains a priority for my administration, every person in my administration involved in this. And we're going to continue to work to bring home every American who continues to endure such an injustice. We also want to prevent any more American families from suffering this pain and separation. And I strongly urge all Americans to take precautions, including reviewing the State Department's travel advisories before they travel overseas, which now includes warnings about the risk of being wrongfully detained by a foreign government. Make no mistake about it, this work is not easy. Negotiations are always difficult. There are never any guarantees. But it's my job as President of the United States to make the hard calls and protect American citizens everywhere in the world, anywhere in the world. And I'm proud that today we have made one more family whole again. So welcome home, Brittany. And now I'd like to invite Sherelle to say a few words to you all. Of course, she's not excited at all about this. Sherelle, it's all yours, kiddo. Congratulations again.
Thank you. So over the last 9 months, you all have been so privy to one of the darkest moments of my life. And so today I'm just standing here overwhelmed with emotions, but the most important emotion that I have right now is just sincere gratitude for President Biden and his entire administration. He just mentioned this work is not easy, and it has not been. There's been so many hands involved, and so I'd like to take a moment to just specifically mention a few. Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Josh Geltzer from the National Security Council, Roger Cartson and Fletcher Schoen from the Hostage Envoy's Office. A special thank you to Governor Richardson and Mickey, the Mercury Players, the WNB PA, for your advocacy. And also, you guys may not know this, but my family has been tremendously supported by the Wasserman Agency. BG's agent, Lindsay Colas, has just been amazing for me and my family throughout this process. So today my family is whole, but as you all are aware, there's so many other families who are not whole. And so BG's not here to say this, but I will gladly speak on her behalf and say that BG and I will remain committed to the work of getting every American home, including Paul, whose family is in our hearts today as we celebrate BG BG being home, we do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones. So thank you everybody for your support. And today is just a happy day for me and my family. So I'm gonna smile right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Mr. President, what has Russia gotten in return, Mr. President? What has Russia gotten in return for this prisoner swap?
Will Brittany be back in the U.S.?
What has Russia gotten in return?
Happy day there for Brittany Griner's wife, Sherelle. Brittany Griner, of course, on her way home now, on a plane, on her way back from Russia to the United States. President Biden just announcing the release their trade for arms dealer Victor Bout. Cecilia Vega at the White House, something the president is working on for months.
George, they've been working on this at the highest levels of these governments between here in the United States and Moscow with constant talks. And as you heard the president say, not just talks between these governments. The president has been in close contact over these last 9 months with Sherelle Griner. George, we have to pause and talk about that smile on Sherelle Griner's face. What a day for this family to see Brittany Griner, as she called her by her nickname, BG, on her way home. President Biden posting on Instagram and Twitter this photo saying just moments ago, you can see right there, they were on the phone with Brittany Griner. He says she is safe. She is on a plane. She is on her way home. We know that Griner was pardoned by Putin before she left Russia, that this swap between these two prisoners, for the prisoner exchange happened at the Abu Dhabi airport early this morning. And President Biden saying just now this was a choice. This was not a choice about which American to bring home, because Paul Whelan is still in custody, and he is saying that Moscow views that as a very different case, that he will work to continue, the administration will continue to try to bring him home. You heard Sherelle Griner there say that this will be both her and Brittany's mission going forward, that they remain committed to getting these other Americans home. But George, the headline here, the smile on her face, Brittany Griner is on her way home. What a day this is. What a coup for this administration. But most importantly, Brittany Griner is on her way home as we speak.
Cecilia Vega, thanks. Let's go to Martha Raddatz. Martha, the president did devote so much of that statement to the case of Paul Whelan as well, and we've already heard from Whelan's family.
We have, George, an incredibly gracious yet heartbreaking statement. Let me read part of it. I am so glad, this is from David Whelan, Paul's twin brother. I am so glad that Brittany Griner is on her way home. As the family member of a Russian hostage, I can literally only imagine the joy she will have being reunited with her loved ones. The Biden administration made the right decision to bring Ms. Griner home and to make the deal that was possible rather than waiting for one that wasn't going to happen. Now, when Trevor Reed was released earlier this year, the family released a statement. Paul Whelan said, "Why was I left behind?" But that is not happening this time. David said in the statement, "It is so important to me to make clear that we do not begrudge Ms. Griner her freedom." But he said, at some level, our family has steeled ourselves for this likelihood, despite the possibility that there might be an exchange without Paul. Our family is still devastated. They, of course, George, are very worried about his health. He has been there 4 years and has many 12 years to go on that sentence. So there is a lot of worry in the Whelan family, but again, an incredibly gracious statement. And President Biden, of course, mentioned that he will stay on this case, and Sherelle as well.
And Martha, we also heard President Biden say that the Russians insist on treating Paul Whelan's case differently. At minimum, he's another bargaining chip.
And another bargaining chip. I guess they weren't about to release two people who are being detained for just a Victor Bout, although that is a major exchange. Excuse me. So the Russians will try something else, you can imagine. But this is a very different case, and the Whelans say that as well. Paul Whelan was accused of spying, and they claim, again, that he had a USB drive on him that contained the names of intelligence officers, and he has been detained since 2018 and charged with spying. Obviously, a very serious charge in Russia, George.
Martha Raddatz, thanks. Pierre Thomas, Victor Bout, notorious arms dealer, his heyday in the 90s.
Known as the Merchant of Death. And this was a person that U.S. law enforcement had wanted to serve every bit of his sentence, but clearly The freedom of Brittany Griner became the priority. Law enforcement knew it. They went along with this, helped facilitate it, George. But clearly, this was a man who was involved in flying weapons all across the world, including to Africa, where thousands of people were killed, supposedly with his weapons. The DEA eventually took him down in a sting operation. He's now on a plane flying back to Russia. But all smiles. A lot of people very happy that Brittany Griner, her nightmare is over.
Pierre Thomas, Victor Bout, no real intelligence value now. I mean, all of his activities were so long ago.
Absolutely. His intelligence opportunities to wreak havoc are over. The U.S. law enforcement had tried to get information from him, obviously, but now he's of limited value in terms of intelligence. Some law enforcement officials, of course, wanted him to serve his sentence to pay a penalty for all that death that he helped bring about across the world. But again, everyone today happy that Brittany Griner is coming home.
Okay, Pierre, thanks. I want to bring in our military analyst, Steve Gannon. Of course, Steve, this comes as we're seeing Vladimir Putin's forces face trouble in Ukraine. That's the backdrop for this entire negotiation.
Yeah, George, it all comes back down to Ukraine and for Putin trying to gain negotiating leverage and to get the U.S. to come off of its very hard line on Ukraine. I do want to go back just briefly to something that President Biden said that's very important here. And he made the comment here that people need to be careful about where and when they travel. Look at the State Department advisories. What he's saying is that the Russians will always hold some Americans on trumped-up charges. And so they may have let Brittany Griner go here today, but they will grab somebody somewhere else and have them as a negotiating tool sometime in the future. So this is what the president's saying. Be careful. Don't be that next pawn that gets grabbed.
Steve, that was a pretty remarkable warning to have that come, not some State Department bulletin, but from the President of the United States.
Yeah, we just need to stand by. This has been the Russian MO for years. It's pretty much KGB standard operating procedure, and so we can expect that the Russians will want to have at least a few Americans that they can use to negotiate when it's useful. Obviously, Brittany Griner's utility has peaked, and so Putin has let her go. But we see that Paul Whelan still is held because Putin believes that there's still some negotiating leverage to be had with him.
And Steve, does this swap at this time tell you that more is going on in possible negotiations over the war in Ukraine?
At this point, George, I think it's just scene setting and Putin trying to improve his negotiating position. This, as Martha said, this is not going to change a lot of minds, but it has been an irritant, and it's been something that the president hasn't been able to further any broader discussions with NATO allies and with the Ukrainians about potential peace negotiations, because it's just that political problem for President Biden, and now Putin has solved that, and Putin will hope that will begin to move things forward towards a negotiated settlement.
Okay. Steve Gaynor, thanks very much. I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, John Carl. John, we saw the smile on Sherelle Griner's face. We saw President Biden take to the cameras early this morning. He's on a pretty remarkable run over the last several weeks.
He sure is, George, but this one particularly sweet for President Biden. This had been such a high priority for him. And think about this. Brittany Griner has been in Russian prisons for 294 days. Almost immediately since she was detained, this was a priority, not just for the Biden administration, but personally for President Biden. And when you think about her detention coming exactly 1 week before the Russians invaded Ukraine, the negotiations against a backdrop that couldn't have been any more difficult. Biden, at the very time his administration trying to negotiate her release, also leading worldwide opposition to the Russian invasion. A tricky situation, to say the least, and one where the Russians, as Steve mentioned, were clearly trying to use her not just as a bargaining chip to get somebody else released, Victor Bout, but clearly trying to use this to gain leverage against that U.S. opposition and the U.S. worldwide opposition to the invasion of Ukraine.
John Carl, not many issues draw bipartisan support in Washington these days. Expected here.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something, what not just bipartisan, George. I mean, there was a nationwide movement to bring attention, to keep attention on this case for nearly 10 months. Sustained attention. Democrat, Republican, but also out in the sports world, the NBA, the WNBA, trying to make sure that Brittany Griner was not forgotten as she spent all that time in a Russian prison.
And Martha, these negotiations always so fraught for presidents. The more you trade, the more it could encourage adversaries to take more hostages.
Exactly, and that's what administrations trouble over every time. And in the end, if you can free someone and you give up someone who is of no value, essentially, anymore, that cycle could continue. And I think that is exactly why President Biden said, please be careful. Please do not go to places you are not supposed to be. Take heed of those State Department statements and warnings when you travel, because indeed, the Russians will take someone else if someone is there, and they will negotiate. And in this one, they got Victor Bout. There's so many exchanges over the past many years, and of course, Trevor Reed was freed in an exchange as well. But now we have Brittany Griner, and we're all very happy about that.
That is the good news today. Brittany Griner is free from Russian prison on a plane now on her way home. That's all for us right now. Have a good day.
This has been a special